I'm Barbara Veale. I've lived virtually all my life in Lewisham, apart from a 6-year trip across the borough to Greenwich, and then I came back. I've lived where I'm living at the moment, here in Hither Green, for over 40 years. Was married, my husband died nearly 14 years ago now, and I've got 2 lovely girls. Was my first sort of experience of doing any campaigning, because when I was 39 years of age, I was pregnant with my older daughter, and my husband and I found to our horror that at that time, if you had an amniocentesis test, which involved drawing placental fluid from the uterus to do various checks and examinations on it, you as the patient were then expected to travel to Guy's Hospital with your sample to make sure that it got to the right lab. And we were both horrified, because the procedure is a nerve-wracking one, and also you're told to sort of take it a bit easy afterwards, because there is an inherent risk of a miscarriage just by having the test. And we just said, no way should this be happening. So I wrote to the hospital afterwards and said, this really is not on. And in fact, they realised that it wasn't a good thing for people to be on trains, buses, doing this kind of thing. So they changed the system so that the hospital then collected any such samples they had and arranged to get them to Guy's for the appropriate test. So that was my sort of first taste of direct campaigning on a health issue. And then my husband had been unwell for a number of years with a liver problem, and he was in and out of both Lewisham Hospital and then ultimately was in King's, which is where he died early in 2009. And I rejoined the Labour Party at that time. One of those weird things that you sometimes do. When I phoned the Labour Party to cancel his membership, having resigned myself over Blair's insistence on going to war in Iraq. And they said to me, "Oh, thank you for letting us know. Sorry about your husband. Is there anything else we can help you with?" And I'd always thought that once Blair had gone, I would rejoin the party. So I just made the instant decision. I did that, got back involved in the local Labour Party itself, and found that there was a very small health campaign running at the time, which I joined. But I have to say, we weren't anywhere near as effective as the Save Lewisham Hospital campaign became. And then around the summer of 2012, when campaigners were first picking up that there was going to be this big report and recommendation from Matthew Kershaw, I think he was the head administrator guy, about making massive changes to the services at Lewisham Hospital. Louise Irving called the first meeting of anybody, any groupings that might be interested in campaigning against this. And I was part of the inaugural meeting, and then became a very sort of active member of this sort of campaign that really picked up over the October and November of 2012, and got very involved in all the organising that we did as part of big general meetings of interested people. But I was very keen to get involved in the leafleting side of things and getting people, mainly shoppers in Lewisham Market. It wasn't obviously just me doing this on my own, but we were there pretty much every Saturday morning, and sometimes it would be longer in the day, getting people to sign a petition against the rejigging of the services at Lewisham Hospital. And then when we decided to have the first big march on the 24th of November 2012, we were putting posters up, handing out leaflets, and I was a steward on that march. And then throughout 2013, there was just a whole rolling programme of all different types of activities to keep things in the public eye, but always backed up with lots of leafleting, lots of approaching people, lots of discussions with people on the street, going on demonstrations, and just making the Lewisham community aware of what they were in danger of losing. And I think it was 10,000 at least people marching in November 2012. And when we realised that Jeremy Hunt, who by then was the Secretary of State for Health, was not taking a blind bit of notice, we had to, as we put it, we need to march again. And we campaigned for a second march on the 26th of January 2013, where 25,000 people came out on the streets. And that was a time of year where we'd had, in the week running up to that, very heavy snow and ice. So not brilliant conditions, except that on that day, although the snow and ice was still around, it was beautiful sunshine and blue sky, so that worked well.
I was just wondering what people's reaction was. Get them on board, or?
Initially, virtually everybody was on board. I mean, you had obviously a number of people who just got their shopping to do or whatever, and they don't want to take a leaflet, they just want to walk on through, do their business and so on. And of course you've got some people who were Tory supporters, not that many I have to say, but some who would stop and argue with you that this was all really necessary, this rationalisation of services and so on. But lots and lots of people in Lewisham were, thinking, what? We can't have our A&E downgraded and our maternity services downgraded, especially as the hospital had spent a lot of money on upgrading the maternity facilities, which all would have been a complete waste of money had the Kershaw plans, and I suppose we must call them the Hunt plans as well, actually come to fruition. And I think those of us who know a little bit about the way that if hospital services start being chipped away quite substantially, if you downgrade an A&E and then you get to the point where the A&E is closed, that very rapidly can have a knock-on effect that major surgery doesn't get undertaken at the hospital either. And so then that really is putting the skids under something and could lead to the whole hospital closing. And we had ludicrous things in the reports that the government put out, whereby they employed at vast expense people like Deloitte's, the management consultants, who reckoned that it would only take about 9 minutes to be able to travel from the area around Lewisham Hospital to the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Woolwich. And everybody said, this is mad. They did have a little caveat, because where they put this in the appendix to one of the reports, it had in brackets, assuming no traffic. So really, they might have done that at 2:00 in the morning on a good weather night and putting their foot down and hoping there weren't any speed cameras around. But in fact, one of the stunts, if you like, that the campaign did was to have somebody videoed travelling on a bus from the Lewisham area to QE, and they had a mock bandage round their head and a bit of sort of blood coming out of the bandage. But again, it was, if I'm right, at least an hour, might have been closer to an hour and a half. So, just the whole premise of what the government was trying to do was just full of holes from the off. And the other thing that we'd found is that Lewisham people were also incredibly generous in terms of donations that they would give. When we sort of moved up a little bit from just doing leafleting, we were allowed to have a temporary stall, and we had mugs commissioned, like the one you're drinking out of at the moment. And so we had badges, we had wristbands, we had mugs, we had and bags. We moved on to producing all different types of bags, and the number of times people they'd say, how much was the mug? Now, I can't exactly remember whether it was £2.50 or £3 or something like that. They would give a £20 note and say, keep the change. That was their way of doing a donation. Because when this campaign first got going, we didn't have any cash from anywhere. So it was our own fundraising activities initially, and certainly when we got into what was the fight to fund a judicial review in the High Court, alongside the separate judicial review that Lewisham Council were doing, that's when we got bigger, community groups involved, the leading one being Millwall Football Club, who offered to match fund up to a certain level, and what we raised for the High Court they would match. And that made a hell of a difference, because it's pretty hard in this country to go take something through the High Court if you haven't got a bit of money behind you. I suppose that the first memory would be the first public meeting that the campaign organised in early November 2012, where we'd got the date booked for what would be the big, what we hoped would be a big demonstration later that month, and it was seeing people. It was a packed meeting at Lewisham Hospital in the Leshoff Theatre. There was an overspill in the Calabash Centre in George Lane, and there was just a sense of excitement that people were coming together to actually fight this proposal. I suppose the next big thing for me was actually on the first Saturday, the 1st March, the weather was foul. It was absolutely peeing with rain. It was windy, it was cold, and I suppose a little part of me thought, will people turn out for this? And then when we just saw people coming and coming and coming, and we marched from Reynolds Street, as it was then in Lewisham Centre, and through the High Street and up to Ladywell Fields, it was just fantastic to see the level of support and the number of families that were there. It wasn't something that was just what you might call the old politicos turning out, and sort of, another chance to sort of like stuff it to the Tories. Yes, there was that element, but there also was the families, the older people who rely so much on hospital services, who were wanting to say their piece. So that was great. We had the disappointment in a way that Hunt wouldn't accept that they'd got this wrong on what they were trying to do. So very early in 2013, we knew we were heading for trying to do these judicial reviews in the courts. And then, as I say, we knew we had to march again. So 26th of January 2013, and to have been delighted at 10,000 turning out 2 months earlier, to then counted and was verified by the police, who do their own checks on these things, at 25,000 people, was just amazing. And of course it made you feel that all the hard work you were putting on building for this was really worthwhile doing. And again, we ended up actually on that march up in my local park, Mountsfield Park. It was like a mud pit up there at one point, but we had people writing messages on a huge roll of paper that just kept being unwound and unwound more and more as people wrote their messages. People were signing the petition, and it was a really good community feel, that the community really was behind what we were trying to do. And then throughout the months of, from February to July, there were lots of different things that people organised, that I was involved on the fringes, or I attended some of them, but not all of them. And so, for example, a very good friend of mine, Vicky, organised the buggy army demonstration, which was outside the then offices of the Department of Health up in London. She got loads of parents with young children in their buggies and went up and they were singing various sort of songs that people had composed in support of the hospital and so on. And I went along with that. And that was really terrific. But, that wasn't my work. That was, although I would give out a leaflet about it the previous couple of Saturdays, but the actual organisation and pulling that together was done by others, as was the thing that was called the Hunt for Jeremy Hunt in his own constituency in Farnham in Surrey. He didn't really want to answer for what he was trying to do in Lewisham. So a group of people travelled down on Saturdays and campaigned in his own area, outside his constituency office, wanting to talk to him. Of course, he just hid all the time. But people went off and did that. But I tended to stay on my patch, as I called it, in Lewisham Shopping Centre or just outside, doing the usual Saturday morning selling merchandise and giving out the latest leaflets. And we just had so many different leaflets giving updates, different slants on things, and that was why we needed to keep the fundraising going, because obviously it's expensive to get posters up, leaflets put out. We had another thing where Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, and periodically he would go out in the different boroughs and have it's a bit like the question time thing that you have on the BBC TV. He would do a question time. Well, of course, the time when he came to Lewisham, which must have been in about the April or May of 2013, he got a real roasting from the audience. And he was as hopeless and helpless then as he was recently when Prime Minister, all full of bluff and bluster, hadn't got a real grip on the detail of anything. He also promised to have meetings with the campaign, and he would have representations with Hunt, and he did bugger all, but that's Boris Johnson for you. The other big thing that I wasn't directly involved in, but on the day this happened, I was at the Broadway Theatre at Catford. It was the People's Commission, very much sort of led by Tony and Olivia. This was the event that was chaired by Michael Mansfield. We have to say Casey now, don't we? He wasn't then, obviously. Which was a fantastic piece of work that just took evidence from some experts, but an awful lot of community people who were giving their views on what Lewisham Hospital had done for them and why the service was so vital. And that was a piece of work that was so very well received that the lawyers from the campaign side and from Lewisham Council made reference to this in their representations at the High Court. And I suppose if I had to pick out one thing that was the absolute highlight for me, on the 31st of July 2013 was the day we got the judgment on the two judicial reviews to try and get this proposal stopped in its tracks. And we had people inside the court to listen, but I was part of the group that was waiting outside, and we had a huge demonstration of us there in the morning as everybody was going in. But I was the person who was the link that as soon as what was announced in the High Court, I got a text saying what it was, and then I was the one who had the privilege of being able to shout out to everybody, we've won, because even at that point there was still, not me, but I do know that some people in the campaign were thinking, nah, the establishment will always win on these things. There'll be a way that they won't allow this. We won't win this. And of course we did. And we'd also sort of tempted Providence to some extent, but we had already got made up our some victory. I'm just showing you on now, on the old wooden sticks, but they were wrapped up in black plastic bags. But of course, once we knew that we had won, we could open up those bags and then everybody could brandish Hunt defeated, and then we very rapidly got some A3 size, the bigger size, and got them plastered up all around Lewisham and Catford, sticking them on railings and things so that people could see. And there was such a big gathering outside Lewisham Hospital that night, with community came out, the staff came out. I mean, that's the other thing I probably should have said right at the beginning on all this. It was Lewisham staff as well as, who were so important in the campaign and how it was run at the big meetings we had. Yeah.
So the poster says, "Victory for Lewisham, Hunt defeated," and it's a red background with white typeface, with Save Lewisham Hospital Campaign web link, and it's done in the style of the Keep Calm poster that's very famous. And actually, just to say, my mug says, "Don't keep calm, get angry and save Lewisham Hospital," which became the sort of motto I think I've seen the most, really.
It was our brand. I mean, that once we'd got that first poster done, that then appeared in small versions on all of our literature. Also, the time of year when of the first demonstration, it was the run up to Christmas, and part of the thought was, if we can get these posters into so many windows, the bright red would stand out, and it would be that sort of splash of colour. I mean, I am useless on design stuff and in many instances wording of leaflets. I mean, I have a background in local government for most of my life before I became a teaching assistant, before I retired. I'd be too wordy on things. You need this, you know, eye-catching but punchy set of words.
I guess it's the colour of danger as well.
Yes,
isn't it?
yes,
So.
I think that's right. And then, of course, Hunt tried to sort of prick our bubble, shall we say, because he decided to appeal. And again, you know, some people thought, no, this really is when the establishment will come together and they'll find a way. But then a lot of us said, no, we're going to fight on with this. So there was, you know, the further leafleting, the galvanising, the demonstration outside the High Court. And I can't now remember exactly when it was. I think it was sometime in the October of that year that the High Court met to hear the appeal. And I was actually inside the court listening to all the deliberations. It was over 2, possibly 3 days, but it was very short anyway. And then the lead judge just said to everybody, OK, we're going off now, we will consider what's been presented to us. But the words, I can't remember his exact words, but it was, what it meant was, don't go too far away because we're going to be back fairly soon, I think. And so the 3 appeal court judges went out and literally they were back 10 minutes later to effectively say to Jeremy Hunt, bog off, you know, this is unlawful, it stands, off you go. So that was another sort of, you know, big exciting thing. And, you know, again, once the word got round the community, everybody was so delighted. But then at that point we realised that it wasn't over. The campaign wasn't over because we'd already by that point had inadequate financial settlements for the NHS, let's be kind, cuts, really. And the writing was on the wall that the NHS was not going to get the level of money that it needed, and as we now realise, not the forward planning on the staffing levels that would be needed to deal with an ageing population, and where so many people, because they live a lot longer, have got more chronic conditions to live with, and that, you know, is a big burden on not only the hospitals but also on the community support, the primary care, the community care, and that side of things is just abysmal, the way that's been neglected. And don't get me started on social care. I've got an aunt who is 101, who will be 102 in January, fingers crossed, who's in a care home, a good one. But I know the struggle that there is to staff them properly, staff them well, and the level of pay is abysmal. Absolutely abysmal. The first big fundraiser we had, 27th of September 2013, the campaign had these, what we called working parties. So those that were interested in literally working on a particular aspect of the campaign would have regular meetings and discussions, and then having worked up proposals and ideas would then take them back to the bigger campaign meetings. And a guy called Pat was the one who was the leading light behind the first fundraiser. All manner of brilliant local bands were happy to come along and perform for free. Bill from the Rivoli provided the premises for free. And I have to confess, I can't remember how much money we raised from this first fundraiser, but it ran into many thousands of pounds. I think you'd probably have to ask Olivia, because that will be on the website somewhere, what this raised. And it was an absolutely brilliant evening. We ran a raffle, one of those where you give out the tickets on the night, and loads of people bought raffle tickets, and we had various prizes and so on. And I got my girls and their friends came along, and a great time was had by all. In Hither Green there was this fantastic group that, I don't know, they must have set up 15 or more years ago, called Haven't Stopped Dancing Yet. And they're still going and have got bigger and bigger. But they do all this great 80s disco music, and a couple of those came along to sort of lead a section of the evening. But it literally was a couple of very small speech. We couldn't even call it a speech. It would be like a why we're here, what it's for, and then the rest of it was given over to having a good dance, a good time, and a good drink. Then we still carried on doing our weekly stalls and leafleting at Lewisham, because I know that I was at least for 18 months, maybe 20 months, more or less every Saturday, apart from being on holiday or ill or that, was spending time at Lewisham doing stuff, and it was continuing to sell mugs, it was continuing to sell bags, all of which was to bring in money so that we could carry on with the campaigning. And then, where are we? The October of 2014, we had a second fundraiser, which I led on that. But I mean, again, there was a working party. It was a group of us behind all the arrangements. But I think one of the things I'm quite proud of is that I used to volunteer in a local primary school, Sandhurst. And they had a great summer fair it must have been for 2013, where it's one of those where they did a raffle, but it wasn't just sold tickets on the day and then drawn. If you get agreement from the council, and it's part of the Gambling and Lotteries Act, whatever, you have to get permission and pay for it to run a raffle that can last over a period of time, so that you have a chance to sell lots of tickets. And then as long as you print on it when it's going to be held, the draw is going to be held and when, so it's all above board, and you have to do a return to the council afterwards in terms of what you've raised, what the purpose is, and the key prizes you've got. I saw this being done at as I say, at the primary school, and I thought, I'm going to pinch that idea. So earlier on in 2014, when we were talking about what we wanted to do by way of another fundraiser, I said, do people feel that they could go out in their own workplaces or around their own local communities and actually sell raffle tickets? But you couldn't sell them on the street, so it wasn't like we could sell them from the market. It had to be that people, you'd go door to door. So some people did that. Other people, as I say, went to workplaces, held parties at their own home. People came, they bought raffle tickets. And So that was all going on. We had a
That's
top
been
cash
huge.
prize of, I think it was £250, was it? Then somebody, Brian in the campaign has got a cottage in Suffolk, and so one of the prizes was that somebody could win a weekend in the cottage. And we then had this wonderful woman, Tina Turner, tea lady, who did this disco bingo evening, and then the usual music and stuff. But I remember it a bit more, I suppose, because I was sort of like the lead on the working party for this. The upshot was that the ticket prices and donations on the night raised about £5,000.
Wow.
The raffle alone raised 2,400, and it was sort of like it was gobsmacking. Whoever has held, a raffle, when it's if it's like a big organisation that does a national raffle, like some of the big charities or political parties, with a huge sort of admin machine behind them, raise that kind, more than that. But this was our local campaign, and everybody mucking in and everybody working so hard to raise the money. Yeah, nearly £2,500 just on the raffle.
That's amazing. And I would love to meet the Tina Turner tea lady.
Yes.
That's fantastic. She sounds great.
Yes. Yeah, she did a very good, passable impression of Tina Turner.
You were so involved with being in the market, at the market every Saturday, and I was wondering about your childhood memories of growing up in Lewisham.
I grew up in New Cross Gate, and the market that I would regularly go to with my mum was Deptford Market. And so I have lots of memories as I'd have to be a bit beyond a toddler. So from the age of 5 upwards, I remember being walked very briskly by mum from home in Jerningham Road down to Douglas Way in Deptford to get whatever shopping she got from there that she could manage to carry all the bags back on, or we'd come back on the bus, in fact. But I mean, do you want some fascinating sort of images that I will never leave me, really?
That will be great.
Mum, as a lot of people did, used to buy broken biscuits because they were so much cheaper. There'd be these great big white paper bags, quite thin paper, and you'd get that chock-a-block full. Lord knows how much it was. I mean, that would have passed me by. But next to the broken biscuit stall was where they sold eels for people to make jellied eels, which is, a delicacy for some. I've never been able to take to it, but I can remember as a child, and I mean this memory will probably appall some great animal lovers and people who are vegans and wouldn't eat anything like this, but there was a huge tank of live eels with black skins, and the guys who ran the stall, when somebody said however much weight they wanted, they would grab the eels, chop off the heads, chop off the tail, rip down the body with a knife, and with the back of the knife they would slide out the innards into another tank. And some of the eels were also kept in deep, like butler sinks. Now these are the old-fashioned big white sinks, and I just stood there as a young kid. I can remember just watching this happening, because the innards that went into this big sink bucket arrangement would writhe about, and I just couldn't understand what was going on, that something wasn't instantly dead with its head cut off, but part of it would still carry on moving. And then when they'd got however many eels prepared in that sort of way, then with a separate big knife, they'd just go chop, 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 cutting it up into chunks of 3 or 4 inches, scooped into, I don't know what, it might have been a plastic bag, I don't know what people would have brought along. Certainly wasn't Tupperware type stuff that you would have these days, or bring your own container. And off they'd go, and they would cook that and make their jellied eels. But it was this sort of regular weekly thing. The broken biscuits, I would go and gulp at this mess that was the stall next door. And then, not every week, but occasionally, I had an uncle. He was my mum's sister's husband, and he ran it was a barrow boy, but he had for fruit and veg, and his barrow was very close to what is now Deptford Station. It wasn't as done up as it is now, but that was his pitch, and he sold his fruit and veg there. And certainly sometimes we'd go along, and Mum didn't get a lot of stuff from him, but it would be just to sort of say, oh, hello Alfie, how you doing, and check up on her sister and all that. But he would give me in the summer a peach, and I can remember now eating that peach, beautifully juicy, beautiful flavour, and just, I suppose my childhood memory is that things like that tasted different. And we used to get so many things, like shoes for me. We wouldn't go to a shoe shop. It would be somewhere that had got a couple of barrows with all these different kids' shoes in some different sizes, and you'd stand trying them on, on the pavement or just off, and standing on a bit of cardboard so you didn't mark the soles of the shoes. But I was not a great user of the market at Lewisham, probably until I got involved in the campaign, because when I grew up and ended up living here and I was working, there was the occasional local shop that I would use, but of course by then supermarkets had come in, and it was more the tradition of I'd go to the supermarket to buy stuff. And again, I suppose that's also a reflection on what you're earning, because a lot of people go to markets because it's tremendous value for money. And when money is tight, you get a great big scoop of something for £1, although I think it's gone up now, it's more than £1 a scoop. But then, of course, when you're on your own, which I was for a lot of my time before I met my husband and had the girls, and now I can't deal with a scoop full of whatevers, because, all right, you could freeze it all, I suppose, but then you run out of freezer space. So it is more convenient to go to a different shop where you could buy 1 onion if you wanted it, or just 2 carrots, that sort of thing. But yeah, that just coming back to the weekly trip to Deptford Market, the other highlight of the Saturday morning, when we got back home with all this stuff, my dad would have cooked lunch, which was always mashed potatoes, sausages, fried onions and peas, which I loved. That was a favourite lunch for me. Yeah. Okay, well that sounds like a really good note to end on, and happy memory. Yes, of Deptford Market. I don't think they do the eels anymore, but there is a good fish stall. My mum goes and gets fish from Deptford Market, so yes, survived in some form.